Good morning. My name is Nancy Von Euler. I'm Vice President of Programs at Fairfield County's Community Foundation, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the second of our 25 on 25 webinars. In celebration of FCCF's 25th anniversary, we're hosting this series of specially themed webinars to spark discussions and launch us into the next 25 years. I'm joined this morning by Camille Seabury, Research Associate with Data Haven. Camille, thanks for being with us.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Today's webinar will focus on highlights and reactions to the 2016 Fairfield County Community Wellbeing Index, a collection of compelling data related to our community's health, education, housing, and more. The Community Foundation partnered with Data Haven and many other foundations, hospitals, health districts, and United Ways to complete the research and development of this report and similar reports for other parts of the state. As a foundation dedicated to addressing the county's most pressing needs, we think that access to this type of data is critically important to inform our own strategic planning and to decipher if we're having impact. We think it's equally important for our donors, nonprofit leaders, and the general public to have access to data that helps them better understand and address issues in their communities, the communities they live in, invest in, or serve. I hope you've had an opportunity to download the report from our website and explore it, or if not, that you will feel inspired to do so after this morning's brief conversation. We want this to be an interactive conversation with those of you on the webinar, so please contribute questions at any time by typing them into the chat box that should appear in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you don't see that chat box, look for and click on the small arrow in the top right-hand corner. Great, let's get going. Camille, what was your biggest takeaway in terms of overall findings from the index?
So I think that for me, there's kind of this story throughout the whole report and across anything that we're studying here, where you're seeing these disparities in really just whatever indicator we're looking at. So I think that it kind of starts with just something as simple as who lives where. So what are the demographics of different places, so of different towns within Fairfield County, of different zip codes or census tracts within each of those towns, and just starting with where people are, what resources they have, because then that's going to affect everything else. You know, it bubbles up into any of the other indicators. So this is true really with all of Connecticut, but it's especially pronounced in Fairfield County, where you have so for example, Bridgeport, 70% Black and Latino. The 6 wealthiest towns in Fairfield County are only 4% Black and Latino. So if you think about the resources that exist, they're going to be very, very segregated based just on where people are. So one example of that we have in the report is this look at neighborhood income inequality. And so this is the population of neighborhoods. So we took neighborhoods, we kind of bucketed them based on the income level in comparison to the state, and looked at how that changed from 1980 to 2014. And so with this chart, I really like looking at this in kind of 2 directions. So kind of first what pops out is this, the share of people living in these middle income neighborhoods. So that's those gray bars right in the middle. And so you can see that it was 46% of the population of Fairfield County lived in those neighborhoods in 1980 versus only 33% in 2014. So you can see how that's shrunk. And that's kind of the first thing that stands out. But then the second way to look at it is starting at the ends and kind of moving toward the middle. And so seeing how these kind of extremes of the share of people living in poor neighborhoods, the share of people living in affluent and highly affluent neighborhoods has expanded by a lot. And so things are becoming, people are moving into more and more extremes. And I would also note that on the Greater New Haven version of the report, we didn't even have a category for most affluent. It just went up to affluent. So in Greater New Haven, we still have a larger middle class compared to Fairfield County. So I think that that's a particular challenge for people in Fairfield County is to address those really, really heavy extremes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really visually striking on that chart. So thank you for noting that. I think it's helpful for our listeners to understand what's different about the Community Wellbeing Index. Can you talk a little bit about that? What information does the index provide that you don't get from other sources?
Yeah, so a lot of what we work with is kind of traditional sources. So census data, the American Community Survey from the census gives us a ton of information. That comes out every year. It's available at really small scales. So census tracts, block groups, some things are available down to individual blocks. We look at things from the Department of Labor. We look at things from the State Department of Education. So we have a lot of those traditional sources, but we also have our the Wellbeing Survey. So a lot of this report is based on the 2015 Community Wellbeing Survey. And so for that, we surveyed about 16,000 people throughout Connecticut. We hit every town in the state. And so that gives us information that would only be available from a survey like that, and that's only available on such a large scale because of the coverage that we had. And so a lot of the questions on the survey really aren't measured anywhere else. They're not measured by the census or anything, or they might be kind of variations on measures that would be available elsewhere. So one example that gets used actually a lot in New Haven is this idea of underemployment. So it's not just who's unemployed, which even the way that that's measured by the Department of Labor has some kind of shortcomings. Telling you I need a job and I don't have one. But we then expand that to the idea of underemployment. So that unemployment plus people who are working part-time but really need to be working full-time. So full-time work would be their preference. And so that kind of gets into a more nuanced idea of people's economic situations, because they might have a job, but it's still not enough. It's still not providing the economic needs that they have. So, and then so underemployment is one of the things that we use then for these indices. So we have a financial security index, we have a well-being index, a personal well-being index, a community well-being index, walkability index. So the indices are really interesting because we can take several different measures that might not be a huge deal on their own, but when you aggregate them into a single composite number, you can get a better sense maybe of what's going on, or you can see how those things kind of compound each other. So the financial security index here has, I think, 8 different measures going into it. And so one of the things that goes in here and that's on the slide is just people who have a bank account, right? And so that on its own might not be really, really impacting your financial situation, but when you add in the other things that go into the composite score, so not having a bank account, but also not having access to a car, not having health insurance, having been food insecure at some point in the past year, having not been able to afford prescription medicines sometime in the past year, then you start getting a more holistic sense of what that economic situation is like and what the economic situations of an entire town or an entire neighborhood might be like. So then you have kind of a single number that says, just kind of roughly where people are at and how they compare then to other communities. So in the dot plot up here, and this is kind of hard for people to read, but it's basically a histogram. And so we're looking at different zip codes throughout the state that we have a reliable sample for within individual zip codes. But then breaking that into, if you took everybody who's employed or everybody who's underemployed and made each of those kind of its own zip code. So treating everybody underemployed as a zip code. How do they compare to zip codes overall? And so that's that kind of hollowed out dark blue dot. And so that's pretty low. That's pretty low compared to other zip codes that might have all kinds of different things going on in them. So you really see the effect of that underemployment. And then we also have, we break this down by white, Black, and Latino residents that are employed or underemployed. And so there, again, you can see this disparity where when you're treating Black or Latino underemployed Fairfield County residents as kind of their own zip codes, which is like a little bit of an abstract concept, I know, but just to be able to make a comparison in that way, they have much lower financial security than really any other individual zip codes. And even looking at the bars at the bottom on a lot of measures, white underemployed residents are still better off than Black or Latino employed residents. So you're again seeing that there's something more going on than just something like employment or underemployment, but there's again these issues of who lives where, what resources do people have available to them.
Thank you, Camille. Yeah, this one really was striking to me, and I think for the philanthropic sector and the nonprofit sector, having an index like this that looks at financial security and underemployment in a more nuanced and complex way, as it is in real life, helps you understand really what levers you have to pull to improve the financial security. So, you know, it's not just about having some income from a job. You know, the fact that you have access to a car, it gives you the mobility you need to be able to get better employment, and having a bank account with some savings is what's going to protect you from even a minor financial crisis. So I thought that this was really an important chart for us to understand what's going on in our county.
And I would also just add to that real quick. So I'm not sure exactly how the transportation issue is in Fairfield County, but I know within the New Haven area, that's for a lot of people that kind of makes or breaks your ability to get a job. And so that issue of kind of factoring in, do you have access to a car, factoring that into what your financial situation is, because there does tend to be kind of it's almost a catch-22. Can you afford a car, but also having a car helps you get to a better job. So it was important for us to include that within looking at people's financial situations, and then that points to kind of for policymakers, for other people who might be able to affect increasing access to transportation, treating that as part of a jobs issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also, raises the conversation from eliminating poverty to helping people acquire assets, a car being one of those assets that really can change your ability to improve your financial condition. I just want to remind our audience now that you can submit questions at any time, and we do hope that you will submit questions and contribute to the conversation that we're having this morning. Camille, one of the things I was really struck by was the changing face of the county that was reflected in the data. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had kind of the same thing in Fairfield County as we had in Greater New Haven, where looking at projections of population, so starting with 1990, 2000, 2014, and then this projected population in 2025. In both areas, we had pretty much no projected overall growth between 2014 and 2025. So there's only a 1% increase in the population by 2025. And so that's not really, 1% increase isn't really going to affect a lot of, a lot of resources, a lot of kind of who lives where, what do they do, who's the workforce, stuff like that isn't going to be affected by just 1% overall change in the population. When you break that down, you can see kind of who that population is going to be. And so there is expected to be a decrease in the share of, and also just the raw number of children. And that's happening elsewhere also. But young adults staying about the same, kind of not quite older, but middle-aged adults staying about the same. So those are both single-digit percentage changes. But then this population of older adults is really skyrocketing in a lot of ways. And so, so we have here the population ages 65 to 79 is projected to go up 48%. The population 80 and older is projected to go up 12%. So those two groups combined is a 37% increase. So adults 65 and older by 2025. And so that's really where this change is going to be felt. So that's going to change local economies. That's going to change the county economy in a lot of ways. Because that's really
the demand for services.
Yeah. So the demand for services, the share of who's kind of able to work, are people all going to be able to retire at the age that you might otherwise, expect? What kind of strain might there be on things like social, maybe not, Social Security that's federal, but similar sorts of resources and benefits on more of a local level. Even just at a family level, what sorts of responsibilities do families have to take on if they maybe now have, they might have grandparents living at home that they need to help take care of or something like that, where it's going to affect even family makeup, healthcare needs, things like that really the region needs to be planning for right now to make sure that kind of things are in place as the population gets older so that people are able to age, comfortably and happily and with some economic security. And so Data Haven actually did maybe 2 years ago now a short report just on Connecticut's aging population. So I would recommend that to anybody who might have the need to start studying that now, that sort of changing age structure within our towns.
And then we're also seeing growth in our foreign-born population.
Yeah, so overall, so the growth of the foreign-born population in Fairfield County it's not quite as high as for the entire United States, but it is higher than the state. And so that's not what's shown here, but just the increase over the past couple decades in the share of the population that is foreign-born. And so, so Fairfield County, though, has a higher share of its population that's foreign-born than Connecticut or than the United States. And that's really, again, something that's not quite evenly distributed. So you really have several towns where there are really substantial populations of people that are foreign-born. So again, that's kind of, what resources might people need. So are there enough maybe ESL classes, English classes in somewhere like Stamford that's got a third of its population is foreign-born, just to help make sure that people are are comfortable and have access to resources. But also kind of that's a huge asset to be paying attention to, right? So that Fairfield County does have this very diverse population in some ways. It's very concentrated. So the foreign-born residents are kind of concentrated in some towns and not in others. But if you're looking at the county overall, really seeing that as an asset, seeing that diversity as an asset that the county has that other areas maybe don't. And so in the full report, this didn't actually fit in the slides because there's so much dense information in it, but I would recommend people check it out in the full report. We have a 2-page spread, and this was only in the Fairfield County version. We didn't do it for the Greater New Haven version, but just because there's this kind of richness of where people are, where people are from that are now in Fairfield County. So you can see the change the foreign-born population from every continent and then from a few countries within each continent in 2000 and 2014, which countries have kind of country of origin has grown, which countries of origin have decreased, really just getting like a really rich sense of where people are from in Fairfield County that I think is really, really interesting and also can help people just understand the population better, understand, you know, just that diversity as a huge resource that the county has.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to pause for a minute because we are getting some questions from our listeners. We have about 4 minutes left. So just very briefly, one question was, any sense of what's driving the increased inequality? For example, do you think does it look like it's stagnant wage levels? Is it increased educational requirements, structural racism? You know, what can you, you know, find in the data that would suggest what's driving this?
That's actually a pretty huge and thorny issue. I think that, you know, as far as I know and as far as I think anybody has figured out, there isn't any really one thing that does that. I feel like, you know, maybe once a week I see a different story from maybe the Washington Post data blog, maybe the Urban Institute, the Atlantic, some sort of source like that that does do kind of data journalism or studying issues like that, saying this is what's causing income inequality in the United States. And I think that it's really something that's so complex that there isn't any one answer, the way that it would be really, really useful if we did have any one answer. So I think that's, you know, kind of, if somebody can figure that out, that would be great, because you could solve a whole lot of problems that nobody has any one clear answer on.
So that's
sorry
the
that
big
I don't
question
have an answer.
we all want to answer, yeah. We had another question about whether you looked at census data on median incomes by occupation. And we have a listener who did some work on this and found that workers at lower wages saw no growth in their median wages compared to those in management positions who saw a 7% increase in median incomes.
Yeah, we did look at some, not from the census. I'm trying to find it right now. It's in the full report. We did look at job growth and so increases and decreases in the number of jobs by sector. And we did also look at wages. So that's in the full report within the kind of region of opportunity chapter. So we did look at, yeah, which sectors, which industries had wage growth, wage shrinkage. So it really is, yeah, the finance and insurance sector had really large growth. Management had a really large growth in a way that other sectors have lost wages since 2000.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, sadly, we are out of time. I'm going to encourage people to dive into the full report, where you will find many more answers and many more questions too. There's a lot of really interesting data to explore in this report, and we will be continuing to host conversations throughout our county as the year progresses. We have been, we use this data in our legislative forums in December, and we've been hosting library talks throughout the county. Our next library talk is actually coming up tomorrow at Fairfield Public Library from 6 to 7:30. It's free of charge, but we do encourage you to register. We're going to use the data to do a data walk inspired by a model developed by the Urban Institute that will give you an opportunity to engage in conversation about what you find in the data, what your questions and concerns are, and where you think there's a need for further exploration. And most importantly, where you find a sense of urgency to act. So we thank you very much for joining us this morning. We hope you will tune in to future 25 on 25 webinars, and thanks for being with us.